Test. Evening, everybody. Great to have all of you here, and for those of you joining us online, great to have you with us tonight. Welcome to the Bridge Church Midweek Bible Study. Tonight we're continuing on with our series. The series is titled "The Bible: Secrets Hidden in Plain Sight." And what we've been trying to do, just to remind us all, is to go and look at parts of the Bible that maybe we never paid enough attention to and see things that are there just a little below the surface if we just pay attention. And so we're excited for another Wednesday night Bible study, and we're going to jump in. Let's open with a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for your word. Father, help us to fall back in love with it. Help us to see the beauty of it and what you would show us from it. And may tonight, may our understanding of your word increase. May our clarity increase on the story of your word, and may our commitment to live for you increase. In Jesus' name, amen. Are you all able to hear me okay? Is the mic working all right? All right, it seemed like it was going in and out to me as well, but I wasn't sure. Okay, so we'll real quick, we'll switch mics in just a moment here. So, to get us started tonight, I want to think about the road to Emmaus, and hopefully you can hear me okay. Jesus is walking the 7 miles with 2 of his disciples after the crucifixion and the resurrection, and they don't know what's going on. And so, I mean, this is a long walk, right? I mean, you're talking a couple hours. And so here's what Jesus said to them. And he said to them, "O foolish ones, slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself." What's amazing about this passage is that Jesus is going to spend 2 hours talking. He's going to spend 2 hours talking with these disciples about what we call the Old Testament. He's going to take them back to Moses, beginning with Moses. So this is talking about the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Right? We call that the Pentateuch, which means the 5 books. But oftentimes in the Bible, the original 5 books are just called Moses, beginning with Moses, or the writings of Moses, or taking back to Moses. And then the prophets is going to be all of the history of the Old Testament. So what we call the historical books, the Jewish community referred to as the former prophets. So 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, Joshua and Judges, all of those would be, are you able to hear me? All of those would be in the former prophets. And then the latter prophets are as Israel divides into 2 kingdoms and they begin going into exile. Thanks. Test. Better? All right. Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. As Israel prepares to go into exile, with northern Israel going into exile with the Assyrians and southern Israel going into exile with the Babylonians, then you have all of the people that we normally refer to as the prophets. So Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations. But in the Jewish tradition, they actually called the Hebrew scriptures the Tanakh. And the Tanakh, T-N-K, stood for the Torah and the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim. So the Torah is the first 5 books. The Torah, the teachings of Moses. Torah means teaching. Sometimes we translate it as law, but basically the idea is teaching. So the teaching, and then the Nevi'im is the prophets. And that's all of the historical books and all of what we would normally call the prophetic books. And then the Ketuvim is the writings. So that would be like Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, but also some that we would put in the prophets like Daniel. So they organize their Bible a little differently than we do, right? The Hebrew Bible and our Old Testament is organized a little differently. But what Luke is trying to say here is that for 2 hours, Jesus takes these two disciples back, and beginning with Genesis 1, he walks them through and just spends hours doing it. And what's amazing is that when he's done, they have a meal together. He makes as if to continue. They encourage him to stay with him, have dinner. And so then when he gives thanks and he breaks the bread, their eyes are opened and he's gone. And they say, did not our hearts burn within us as he opened the scriptures for us? So that's what we're trying to do just a little bit of in this Bible study, is just to begin opening up the Old Testament scriptures to our hearts a little bit. So if we go back to Genesis 2, when God makes human in his image, male and female, he makes them, right? And we remember that Adam is mankind often, right? So Adam refers to humanity or human, but it also refers to an individual. And Eve comes from the Latin, but her original Hebrew name meant life. So the two people we have in the garden in Genesis chapter 2 are human and life. And so human and life are starting this story off for us. And God blesses them. And these three ideas, that the blessing of God, that they would be fruitful and multiply, and they would conquer the land, these three ideas, these three aspects of God's promise to them are going to continue through the whole Old Testament. These three ideas, the blessing, the seed, and the land, never go away. They're there the whole time. So then I know last week, for example, we had a great teaching on Genesis 15 and the covenant with Abraham. And what's the covenant with Abraham about? I'm going to bless you, and through you I'm going to bless all of the nations. I'm going to multiply you greatly. Your descendants are going to be like the stars, and I'm going to give you the land. Look to the left, the right, the north, south, east, west. Walk around the land. I'm going to give you all the land. The blessing remains the same. The promise is the same. The same promise that was given to Adam, to human and life, Adam and Eve, was given to Abraham. And God is going to fulfill it, right? But thinking about Genesis 1 and then thinking about Adam and Eve being sent away, remember? And they were sent away to the east because the east represents sort of the city of man, and that's where Babylon's going to be built. We call it the Tower of Babel. We translate it Babel there because it's similar to the Hebrew word for confusion, which is Babel, B-L-L instead of B-B-L. But it's Babylon. That's what's being built. And so Jerusalem's going to be presented in the Old Testament as the city of God. And Babylon is going to be presented throughout the whole Bible as the city of man, the city of man's ego, man's pride, man's autonomy. And that structure is going to continue. And Abraham is going to be called from the east to come back west to the promised land. So tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about how this story continues, and we're going to really lean into the writings of this book. It's a wonderful book. I really recommend it. And if you have Kindle Unlimited, it's free. It's included on it. It's called Reading Moses and Seeing Jesus. It's a wonderful book by an author named Seth. I don't know if he pronounces his last name Postel or Postel, because I've only seen it written. But fantastic. And so we're gonna lean on him a lot tonight. And here's the big argument that he's going to make. Adam's story, and when he says Adam, he means Adam and Eve. Adam's story is intended to be a prophecy that Israel will follow in Adam's steps. So when I first read that, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, man, you know what that's like? That's like a movie trailer. So wait, let me get this right. You're saying that Adam and Eve is like the little 2-minute version of what I'm going to see if I watch the whole film play out throughout the Old Testament. Yep, that's exactly what he's saying. Imagine this, right? So there's a land that's prepared, and then God's family is put into the land, and they're tested, by the serpent, and they fail, and they're exiled to the east. That is exactly the same storyline that God's people are going to live out over the coming centuries. They're going to replay that. So when you think about the story, of Adam and Eve, you literally can think about it like it's a movie trailer. Here is what's going to happen through all of the stories about God's people. And so you really see it. So let's walk through how this starts to play out. So, we've got Cain and Abel, and Cain kills Abel. You have this growing violence, and finally God says, okay, I'm going to decreate the world. And so in the story of Noah, if you'll recall, God takes all of the language of creation, right, when he separates the waters above from the waters below, and he separates the waters below and brings forth the dry land. The story of Noah is going to just play that in rewind. God's going to bring the waters below back together over the land, then he's going to bring the waters above and the waters below together. He's going to decreate, deconstruct, reset the whole world. Reset the land, right? He's going to purify it. And so, coming out of that, you've got the establishment of Babylon, and then you have, last week, the calling of Abram. So Abram and Sarai, right? This older man and this older woman who receive the promise of God and spend years and years waiting for it. And these stories are probably familiar to many of us. You'll recall that Abram, he, like any good husband, immediately tries to sell his wife to a rich guy to get paid. Like, that's our guy, go Father Abram. And part of the riches that he gets from Pharaoh is the slave girl. Her name's Hagar. Her name means foreigner. And so eventually Sarai gets tired of waiting. Take that foreigner, take Hagar, sleep with her. We'll call the son mine. Abram says, all right, I'm on board with that. And what you see, and it's fascinating. I don't remember if this came up last week, but it's fascinating because the language there is that Sarai took Hagar and gave her to the man, to her husband. And the author is recounting in the structure of the story Eve taking the fruit and giving it to her man, to her husband. And so in that story, Hagar is the forbidden fruit. She is the temptation. And Abram is supposed to be like Adam was supposed to be, to confront his wife and to reject evil and to fight for the faithfulness of God, to not decide good and evil, to submit to the promises of God and to trust and to believe. But ultimately, God continues to be faithful to Abram even when Abram's not faithful in return. And in Genesis 15:6, we have the most amazing statement. The Bible says that he believed. God once again reiterated his promise that through Abram, he would multiply his descendants, his seed. He would give them the land. He would bless Abram, and through blessing Abram would bless the nations. And it says that Abram believed. Believed. That's amazing. When I was growing up, I didn't understand the Bible very well. And I probably still don't, but I understand it better now than I did then. And it always seemed to me like in the Old Testament, everybody kind of worked for their salvation. And then in the New Testament, we're justified by faith. And so it seemed like there was this really big difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Like, and we would even talk about it sometimes, like, oh, that's like work salvation, and we're like saved by faith. It's actually not quite right. God delivered Abram, and all Abram did was believe. And when God eventually raises up Moses to go to Egypt to free his people from their slavery, we're going to see in a few minutes that the people believe. They start on that same pathway. They start in a beautiful place. The way that we get right with God has always started with us believing God, trusting God, saying, your way is better than my way. I believe you're faithful. I believe you'll do what you said you'll do. I choose not to take matters into my own hands. And that idea that the just will live by believing is the idea that unites the whole Bible, just like the Abrahamic covenant unites the whole Bible. That idea is central to the Old and the New Testament, not just the New Testament. And the Old and New Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures and the Christian Scriptures, they are one unified story of God taking the world as his temple and making a man and a woman to be his image bearers. One of the authors that I read is amazing. I wanted to read this to you. He says, in a recent publication, Michael Morales looked at the lexical and thematic parallels between Genesis 1 through 3 and Israel's story in the Exodus. He goes on, says a bunch of things, and he says, he argues convincingly that the land in Genesis 1 through 2:3, so 1:1 through chapter 2, verse 3, is depicted as the outer courtyard to a cosmic temple, with the Garden of Eden serving as its holy of holies. The effect of this depiction is clear. God places Adam in the garden sanctuary as the supreme high priest, the high priest in the garden and king over all of creation. And Adam's royal priestly depiction clearly anticipates that God will call Israel collectively to be a royal priesthood. This story just keeps going. From the very beginning, the world is a temple. Adam is a high priest. He's to rule and to reign, work and worship, same word. And you go all the way to the New Testament, and it's still the same calling, to be fruitful and multiply. Only now we reproduce ourselves not only biologically, but we reproduce ourselves by sharing the gospel with people. And we're to reign over the earth, and we're to worship God, and we're to steward all of creation, and we're to anticipate the coming of new heavens and new earth. Like this vocation, this human vocation, what it fundamentally means to be human has never changed. So Abram has Isaac. Okay, Abram is a long story, right? But Abram becomes Abraham, and Sarai becomes Sarah, and eventually they have Isaac, the child of promise. And Abram is willing to sacrifice Isaac. The book of Hebrews says that he believed that God would raise Isaac from the dead, even if he had to die. And so Isaac's life is preserved in the same place where eventually Jesus will die on a cross. And Isaac has Jacob, and Jacob is the younger son. And he is the supplanter, right? He's the deceptive one. And it's weird because he's like the serpent, but he's the child of promise. So it's this strange like mixture. And so Jacob, he steals the birthright, right? He's cunning, he's conniving. Eventually he goes and lives with his uncle Laban. Then he gets cheated, right? He works years for the girl he loves, and then he wakes up to the wrong girl. That's a tough one. And so eventually he's going back home, back to the land. And he sends his family across the river ahead of time, trying to send gifts to pacify his brother Esau, because he's heard that Esau has 400 men, and he's afraid that Esau will kill him. So he sends his family over at night ahead of time, and he stays back on the other side of the river, kind of like a coward. And the Bible says that in the middle of the night at the river Jabbok, that an angel of the Lord wrestles him. He fights this angel the whole night. He fights an angel the whole night. Angel says, let go of me. And he says, I won't until you bless me. And here's the blessing. No longer will your name be Jacob, the deceiver, the replacer, the supplanter, the one who trips someone else, tries to mess with other people, the conniver. the one who's a little too much like the serpent. No longer will your name be Jacob. Your name will now be Israel, because you have wrestled with God and you're a prince with God. And so that's where Israel comes from. Israel is Jacob's new name once God establishes him in the covenant. And so we continue, and, Israel has sons, and one of those sons is Joseph. And he believes from these dreams and visions that God gives him that he's going to rule over his family, that he will be the one in whom the promise carries on. He will be the ruler. And his brothers hate him for it, and his father just loves him because he was the son of Rachel, his precious wife, and so he shows favoritism, and it's a really dysfunctional family. It's been a dysfunctional family since Abram tried to pimp his wife off like a prostitute to the Egyptians. Like, it's been messed up for a long time. So Jacob is carrying on the tradition, and his family is totally crazy. And so his brothers, they're going to kill Joseph, and then one of the brothers is like, hey, let's not do that. Feels a little extreme. Let's sell him. And so they sell Joseph into Egypt, and Joseph, obedient to the Lord, is first raised up, serving Potiphar, then brought low from Potiphar's wife, lying about him trying to sleep with her, and sent to prison. And then God raises him up again, and eventually he raises him up to the point that Joseph interprets Pharaoh, the king's dreams, and tells the king that they're going to have years of plenty followed by years of famine. And the king says, I want to put you. So in that moment, Joseph looks like a wise man, like a magician. That idea of wise man, magician is kind of an Eastern idea. It would almost be like if you ever saw kind of a way of picturing it would be like Jafar in what's that movie called, Char? Aladdin. So if you ever saw the movie Aladdin, the little Disney movie Aladdin, you've got like Jafar, and he's kind of like the wise, sage, mystical, kind of dangerous. That's how Pharaoh sees Joseph. He puts him into that position because he just thinks that the spirit of the gods is on this boy, and like he's sharp, and like, okay, I'm going to make you number two. And so eventually Israel, Jacob, his family runs out of food. And so always, from the time of Abram on, when you run out of food, you go to Egypt, because Egypt always has food. And so the boys go down to Egypt, and all of the interactions with Joseph, and he hides himself from them, and he deceives them a little bit. He's trying to test them to see what's going on. Eventually, the whole family moves down. Joseph has them locate in a great part of Egypt. They're blessed. They multiply. Things are going well. And as the years progress, a new king comes who didn't know Joseph. Joseph is dead. A new king, a new Pharaoh rises to the throne. He didn't know Joseph. And who are all these foreigners living among us? And God is multiplying them like crazy. And there are just all of these Israelites living in Egypt. So Pharaoh has the idea of genocide. We'll kill all the boys. And so he instructs the Israelites to, can you still hear me? Okay. He instructs the Israelites to kill their boys, and then he instructs the midwives to kill the Israelites' boys. And eventually God is going to actually bring vengeance on the Egyptians for this genocide, and he's going to execute their firstborn sons. God's going to take vengeance on behalf of, because he's promised Abram that whoever blesses you, I will bless, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And so God is going to have vengeance on the Egyptians. He's going to decimate them economically. He's going to decimate them religiously. And then he's going to kill their firstborn sons. It's going to be a brutal story. But what's amazing is, here you've got Moses, and, Moses is put into, your Bible will translate it as a basket. But it's the same Hebrew word for Noah's Ark, right? And it's the same idea, like we're going to build a little boat. We're going to build an ark that's going to save the chosen seed of God to keep the promises moving forward. And in the same way that God saved Noah and his family, now God's going to save Moses through the flood waters. He's going to preserve him, and he's going to exalt him. So he saves him in an ark. And Moses is going to come back Sorry, tapped the wrong button. There we go. Moses is going to have his, he's going to murder. He's going to become a murderer. He's going to flee at 40 years old into the desert. He's going to meet his wife. 40 years later, God's going to show up in a burning bush, and this 80-year-old man is going to be called to go back and say to the Egyptian king, let the people go. And here's what was amazing to me. In Exodus 4:31, Moses and Aaron, so Moses was afraid, so he kept trying to tell God he didn't want to be the priest. God kept saying, be the priest. Moses saying, I can't be the priest. So God finally gave up after 3 tries and said, well, tell your brother to come here and we'll make him the priest. And so Moses and Aaron go to Egypt from the desert, and they meet with all of the elders of Israel, and they share what God has said to them. And here's what's amazing. The elders heard all of the things that Moses said, and they believed. And it's that same theme from Genesis 15:6, when Abram believed, and God counted it to him as righteousness. And then as God delivers them through the waters, remember God parts the Red Sea and they cross on dry ground, and then Pharaoh's army pursues them, and God releases the waters, and he covers over Pharaoh's army. He drowns them. This army that you see, you'll never see again after tomorrow. And so when God does that, the very next thing before they begin to have like a worship service for the faithfulness of God, Exodus 14:31 says, and when they saw all that the Lord had done, they believed. And so we are off to an incredible start. We're off to a start that is characterized by faith, by belief in the trustworthiness of God, belief in the goodness of God, belief in the faithfulness of God. And then we get to Sinai. And God begins to give them the law. He's going to end up giving them over 600 laws in the coming years. And here's what's going to happen. Every time he tries to give them a few laws, they break them. And so then he gives them more laws, and they break them. And then he gives them more laws, and they break them. It's kind of like, you know, if you've got young kids and you want your kids to be good to each other, you're like, just be good to each other. And then one of them's like, hits the other one. You're like, no, okay. No hitting. He bit me. No biting. He pinched me. No pinching. It's that same sort of struggle, right? God gives the 10 words, the 10 commandments. And before Moses even gets down, like, what's that sound? And Aaron's taken all the Egyptian gold and turned it into a little idol, and everybody is, you know, getting drunk and having an orgy and worshiping this idol as if it were the God of Israel. And so it just goes south. It goes south in a hurry. And what's interesting to me is that as it goes south in a hurry, God keeps saying to Moses and the people, why won't you believe in me? So, for example, in Numbers chapter 14, how long will this people despise me? And how long will they not believe in me? It's still all about faith. See, if we try and say like the Old Testament's all about works and the New Testament's all about faith, that's actually wrong. It's always been about faith. It's always been about simple trust that God is faithful, that he's loving, that he is for you, that his heart is towards you, that he wants to bless you and multiply you and give you the world. It's not going to be easy, but he wants to do all of that. And we really struggle. And the way that our unbelief manifests is that we act out. We act out against him. The way that we assert our independence from him, the way that we assert our unbelief is that we act out against him. And so even when Moses and Aaron are angry, and then later on they're going to be told, you know, Moses strikes the rock. He was supposed to speak to it. And the Lord is going to say to him, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me. he's still going to frame it as belief. He doesn't say because you didn't obey me. He doesn't say you didn't do enough good things. He says you didn't believe me. He's still going to frame it as belief. What happens after Sinai is so bad that in 2 Corinthians 3, the Apostle Paul will describe the covenant given at Sinai as a covenant of death. Because what follows Sinai is the giving of the law and the dying of the people. And they just keep dying. Eventually, Paul's going to say, look, it's not that the law is bad. The law given at Sinai was good. But what it did was it showed us the truth of what is in the human heart. It was like a magnet picking up all of the little slivers of evil out of the heart and just drawing it to itself, just drawing it up. The law is this magnet for evil. It gathers it together. It concentrates it. So, here is Seth Postel's conclusion. Moses, the greatest of all of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible, declares in no uncertain terms that Israel, like their father Adam, will enter the land, eat of its fruit, break God's commandments as expressed in the Sinai covenant, and be driven into exile. The entire storyline of the Old Testament is already completely obvious by Genesis chapter 3. And then it just begins unfolding. But you've already seen the trailer in Genesis 2 and 3. You've already seen. Have you all ever watched one of those trailers where, Janine and I will be like, we don't even need to go see the movie now. Like, we've seen kind of the whole thing. We feel like we just watched the movie. Genesis 2 and 3 is the trailer for the whole rest of the Old Testament. It shows you everything that's going to happen. So, let me just read you one passage. And this was amazing to me. The first time, I never really read Deuteronomy growing up. It just felt like it would be really hard. And I think because it followed Numbers and Leviticus, and those were really hard, I was like, I ain't doing it. But Deuteronomy, the name Deuteronomy means the second law. And what it is it's the second giving of the law. So Moses is going to die soon. And he's trying to get the people ready to cross into the land, right? Eden. He's trying to get them ready to go back into Eden, the promised land. The place where Adam was established, the place where he was put in the garden, the Holy of Holies, where he was to be a priest and a king and to rule all of creation and to honor God. They're trying to get back there. The land flowing with milk and honey, the good land, right? They're going to be blessed. They're going to multiply. They're going to conquer the land. They're going to subdue the earth. It's the same language, right? Adam's told, subdue the earth. Israelites were going to conquer the land. That word conquer, the word subdue, you're dealing with almost the exact same word. So Moses brings them right up to the edge of it. And he's going to die, and God's already told him that. And so before he dies, he wants to just walk them through all of this one more time. And he wants to, with all of his might, like you would with your kids, try and persuade them to follow the Lord, to believe. To believe. And so he does all of these series of speeches. And here's what's amazing. When you look at Deuteronomy 4, and Deuteronomy is a long book, but already by Deuteronomy 4, if you look at verse 25, it's fascinating. Moses says to them, can you hear me? Okay, sorry. Let me start at verse 15. And you shall be very watchful of yourselves, for you saw no image on the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb from the midst of the fire. Why did they not see an image? Why is idolatry forbidden? Do we remember? Because we are the image of God. Humanity is the image of God. We carry the image of God. That's why idolatry is forbidden. Lest you act ruinously and make a sculpted image of any likeness, the form of male or female, the form of any beast that is on the earth, the form of any winged bird that flies. Let me just jump down to verse 25. When you beget sons and sons of sons, and are long in the land, and you act ruinously, and make a sculpted image of any sort, and do evil in the eyes of the Lord your God to anger him, I have called to witness against you the heavens and the earth, all of creation, the whole universe, right? Anytime they say heavens and earth together, it means all of creation. I have called to witness against you the heavens and the earth, that you shall surely perish quickly from upon the land into which you are about to cross the Jordan to take hold of. You shall not long endure upon it, for you will surely be destroyed, and the Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you shall be left men few in number among the nations where the Lord will drive you. And you shall worship their gods that are human handiwork, wood and stone, which neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell. And you shall search for the Lord your God from there, these distant lands. And you shall find him when you seek him with all your heart and with all your being. Moses isn't even dead. They haven't even crossed into the promised land. And he looks at them and he says, I know you're not going to believe. I know you're going to betray the one who is your God. I know it. What's fascinating is this is how he concludes the first section of Deuteronomy, and it's how he concludes the end of Deuteronomy. He calls heaven and earth to witness against the Israelites, that he's warned them. And God says to Moses, I want you to write a song. I want you to write like a song, that you'd sing. I want you to write a song and teach it to all of Israel. Make them memorize the song. And the song is a poem that says, I know you're going to betray me. And when you do, I'm going to send you into distant lands. I'm going to send you into exile, just like Adam and Eve, just like Cain. It's the same storyline being done again and again. It's really hard. So where's our hope? Our only hope, Israel's only hope, was the seed. There was this seed that was first promised in Genesis 3, that the woman would bear a child, that there would be a descendant, and that descendant would kill the serpent and would die in the fight. He would crush the serpent's head, and the serpent would crush his heel. He would die. And that promise just keeps going the whole way. So if you can imagine, there are these two big ideas in the Old Testament. Number one, all you have to do is believe, but you won't. And number two, it's going to be okay because the promised seed is going to heal the world. The promised seed is going to do the job you can't do. And so that idea of the seed shows up again in Genesis 49 when Israel's dying and he begins to prophesy to his sons. He's on his deathbed and he's telling them that he sees the coming one who's going to save them. And then it gets repeated again in Numbers from Balaam. Balaam he's hired, this sorcerer is hired to curse Israel. And he tries 3 times, and finally he just starts describing, and he says, I see him like rising like a comet. Let me read it to you really quick because it's pretty cool. Numbers chapter 24. Numbers 24, verses 14. Utterances of Balaam, Beor's son, utterance of the man open-eyed, utterance of him who hears El's sayings. El is God, and knows what Elion, that's highest God, knows. Shaddai, the comforter, Shaddai's visions he beholds, prostrate with eyes unveiled. I see him, but not yet now. I gaze on him, but not in time close. A star steps forth from Jacob. A meteor arises from Israel and smashes the brow of Moab. he begins to just say this prophecy that there's coming this ruler, this king, who's going to save the day. And what's amazing is at the very end of Moses' life, he tells Israel in Deuteronomy 18, he says, listen, a prophet, the Lord says through him to the people, a prophet I will raise up for them from the midst of their brothers, like you, like Moses, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I charge him. And he goes on and continues about this prophet. There's this prophet. This prophet's going to be like Moses. It's going to be amazing, this prophet. We got to be on the lookout for this prophet. And centuries pass. And finally, when the Old Testament is being finalized into its current form and all of the edits have been made and all the tweaks made and all the fixes and everything's perfect, here's how the book of Deuteronomy ends. But no prophet ever again arose in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, with all the sign and the portents which the Lord sent him to do in Egypt. The book of Deuteronomy ends in sadness. The book of Deuteronomy ends in tears. Because the community that's receiving the book of Deuteronomy already knows the end of the story. The end of the story, right? This is not written by Moses. Moses doesn't write, but no prophet again arose since then like Moses, whom Moses didn't write that. Later scribes added that to what Moses had written, to the tradition of Moses. They added it because they were still waiting. 1,000 or more years later, and they're still waiting for a prophet like Moses to be raised up from among them. And so next week, what we're going to see is that the next great figure in the Old Testament is going to start to give shape to the seed. It's going to start to give shape to a prophet like Moses. He's going to begin to show you what it means to be a man after God's own heart, to be a warrior, to be a priest, to be a king, to be a prophet. And his name is David. So next week we're going to talk about David. And y'all, David is mind-blowing. He's the coolest. I mean, he's an adulterer and a murderer and at times a coward, so he's human. But he's amazing as a type of the Messiah who is to come. And God is going to love him so dearly. He's going to delight in him so deeply that even centuries after his death, he'll say, I'm going to raise up another David for my people. I'm going to raise up a shepherd for my people. And we're going to get quickly, deeply into all of the messianic hope of the prophets. But for now, we're ending with Moses. It's a sad note. It's a hard note. And the only hope we have is that somehow God's going to raise up the seed of the woman to save his people because they just refuse to believe. So, we got a few minutes left. If there's any questions in the room or questions online, we tried to end a little bit earlier tonight. The last few times I've gone too late and there haven't been any time for questions. So we had a light set up, but I'm not sure we've got it tonight. But I can see you, and my wife Janine is on the phone, and she's ready to answer, she's ready to receive questions. We've got all of you here, so anyone have any questions? And it's okay if you don't, but I'm not trying to pressure anybody. But if you did, we did have one question that came in earlier from Nancy, and she asked about a strange passage in Job chapter 18 where there's a reference to the firstborn of death. So Nancy, here's the answer to your question. In Hebrew poetry, they don't use rhyming words like we do, like, roses are red, violets are blue, sugar is sweet, and so are you, right? We use all rhyming words. In Hebrew poetry, they don't use rhyming words. Instead, what they do is they repeat lines with just slight differences in the wording. And so in Job chapter 18, verse 13, when there's a reference to the firstborn of death, it's just a poetic line to refer to death. But it's saying it a little bit differently because that's how it indicates poetry in ancient Hebrew. So the firstborn of death is just death. And the book of Job is part of the Ketuvim. It's part of the writings. And so it's a poetic book, and it's part of what makes it a little tricky to read sometimes. But the book of Job is awesome, and if you haven't read it, it's hard to recommend it because it's really thick, and it's all of these speeches that are really kind of angry and frustrating. But the end of Job is awesome. So if you want to cheat, just read the last few chapters of Job because that's the best part. I mean, read the whole thing. I feel like I'll get, like struck down or something if I'm like, don't read Job. But I'm just saying, like, if you don't want to read the whole thing, read the last chapters. It's amazing because God finally shows up. The whole book, Job's like, why won't you show up, God? Why won't you stand and talk to me to the face and tell me what's up? Why are you afraid of me, huh? And finally, at the end, God shows up, and he has his say, and his speech is the final speech, and it is quite a speech. So that's the answer to your question, Nancy. Any other questions about tonight? About Moses, Sinai, the people, this idea of the story of Adam and Eve being the sneak preview trailer of the rest of the Old Testament? Any questions? It happens a bunch. So, for example, when they want to pick Saul as, when they want a king, the word seeing or saw plays all throughout that storyline. And so the people see, and then Samuel sees Saul, and then Saul's hidden, and the people desire him, like Eve desired the fruit, and then finally they get Saul, and he's not great, and so then God tells Samuel to go to the household of Jesse because he's going to show him a new king, and so Jesse sees the firstborn Samuel sees the firstborn of Jesse's kids, and he's like, ooh, he's a good one, and God's like, no, because I don't see like you see. You see the outside, but I see the heart. And the word see follows that whole canon through in 1 Samuel. And it's an entire repetition, it's an entire wordplay on Eve seeing that the fruit was good, that she lusted after the fruit. And so ultimately that will carry on. And Jesus will say, if your eye is evil, what hope is there for you? Like your whole body's evil. And you'll have New Testament writers talk about the lust of the eyes. So that idea of vision, that'll play through the whole way. The idea of something forbidden that's desired will play through the whole way. The idea of exile will play through the whole way. East will always be the place of exile. So you get these patterns that will just keep showing up over and over again in the Old Testament. I'm not sure how many times. I'm not sure if anybody knows how many times. We're still trying to figure it out because it's pretty complicated. Thank you for the question. He does. I think it also... Yeah, thank you so much. One of our members here said, that it's kind of like God just keeps giving us chances. And he does keep giving us chances, right? So even when they're in exile, and Jeremiah writes the book of Lamentations, and he pens that very famous section in Lamentations 3 where he talks about great is thy faithfulness, right? The faithfulness of God. Your mercies are new every morning. It's amazing that that's in the midst of exile. Like a third of the population is dead, and a third of the population's in Babylon. And Jeremiah is still amazed that God doesn't give up on us. So that's part of it. But I think part of it too is that we're supposed to see these connections and to go, okay, apart from Christ, apart from God's Spirit, apart from God's people, this is our inheritance. Our inheritance is is to be drawn to that which is not good for us, to be drawn to death. Like we are drawn to death. The wages of sin are death. The gift of God is life, and we're drawn to it. I mean, like a moth to the flame. And that just keeps happening over and over again. And so the text tries to show you that it's happening over and over again through word plays. So like, for example, when David is up on his roof, he sees Bathsheba. That echo of Eve, the echo of Sarai looking at her servant, the echo of Samuel now showing up in David, like that's on purpose. It's to say, look, we're all cut from the same cloth. You know, God is the hero of the Bible. By the way, everybody, if you think that the characters in the Bible are like moral exemplars, that's a bad idea. Kids, don't be like the people in the Bible. There's only one person in the Bible, presented in a few ways, who's worth being like, and that's God. That's why when the servant comes up to Jesus, he's like, you know, good master, and he's like, there's no one good but God. That's the truth. So what the Bible is trying to teach us is that only God is the hero, and Jesus is God. He's Israel's God showing up in human form, but he's God. And so, yeah, it does all of this elaborate literature tapestry to utterly persuade us that we have no hope apart from God rescuing us. That's the big idea. Anybody online? I think we're good. So let me pray us out, and I thank you all for being with us tonight. Lord, thank you for your people and your word and your faithfulness. May we believe and not be like those who back away in unbelief. In Jesus' name, amen.